Welcome to 3 in the News. A podcast for educators by educators. Brought to you by the Los Angeles Institute for Restorative Practices and Research, the authority on restorative practices in K through 12 education.
Hey everybody, welcome to 3 in the News. The structure of the podcast is simple. During every episode, we analyze 3 dominant news stories appearing in K through 12 education. Everything from teacher pay, cell phones, bullying, school policy, school politics, discipline, attendance, and much, much more. I'm excited to have my co-host and CEO and founder of LARP, Carlos Alvarez, here. How you doing? How you doing this week, Carlos?
Hey, Dr. Polgarian, doing great. I'm excited for this amazing conversation, like little spits of conversation.
All right, and there's no way for this person to know this, but tomorrow is my birthday, and so having him on the podcast is an early birthday gift to myself because Dr. Gary Smit is my mentor, somebody that's invested in me heavily, and I reached out to him. I was like, oh, please be on our podcast. He doesn't know this is my early birthday present. Dr. Gary Smith was a superintendent for 25 years in Illinois and Wisconsin and has been a principal and classroom teacher. Gary's book, Instilling Touchstones of Character, connects what matters with Common Core and the 21st century skills to 16 values, skills, and character traits. Apart from being an author, Gary is a prolific trainer for character counts and has written the core curriculum for the program. I want to welcome Gary to the podcast. And Gary, how are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Will. And Carlos, good for me to be here. I'm excited to have the discussion tonight.
And Gary, is this the first podcast you've ever done?
No, it's not. I was trying to think back. It's been the first one in about 2 years, I think. Yeah. I've had a couple of character education, specifically for character topics.
Got it.
But this is a couple of years.
Oh, you're gonna have fun here with us today.
All right. So the way the structure works is we talk about 3 stories, and our first story today comes from ABC News, and it's titled U.S. Students Reading and Math Scores at Historic Lows. Devastating Trend. New national data shows that U.S. students are hitting historic lows in reading and math, revealing deep concerns about the state of American education. Nearly half of 12th graders are now performing below basic levels in reading, only a third are proficient, and just over 1/5 reach proficiency in math. 8th grade science scores also remain low throughout the country. The sharpest declines are among the lowest performing students in the country, while top achievers have stayed relatively steady, widening the academic gap. The report also highlights that rising absenteeism, with more students missing several days of school each month, has increased compared to pre-pandemic levels. And so I want to start off with you, Gary. You know, what do you think, as you read this article, what do you think this historic drop in reading and math reveal about the current state of education in the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting to look at the data, I suppose, from this perspective that's been written by ABC News. It seems that we get these periodically that come out, but I think after COVID and all that we've gone on through, it's going to be a proliferation of the fact that our kids being prepared for either careers or for the job placement. And I always think about this is that it's a national assessment, and we know sometimes kids don't do well on tests per se. And I think today, when we think about all that's out there with AI and everything else, it really becomes a challenge, I think, for kids to be able to sit down and take an assessment test.
Yeah.
I think that's the part of it I look upon, but it is still alarming enough. I also think that there's some things that I think about in terms of life, but would I rather have kids that are very successful and top notch and still flunk life because they lack the necessary social and emotional skills? I look at test always as a snapshot per se of what is there. And I think we have, as educators, have to respond in such a way and say, what can we do to get better?
Yeah. And I think about this. I was kind of hinting at this before in our pre-show. I can't think of a time in American history where there wasn't like this panic button on student achievement. I can't remember a time when there was a golden age of student achievement. I know some people might think about it prior to the Cold War or something like that, but it's always in a state of unflinching decline. That's kind of my takeaway from it.
Yeah, and it is. I just don't like it sometimes because it seems the blame has to go someplace, and it ends up often blaming teachers. And I don't know of a teacher that said, I'm getting into this profession because I want to raise test scores. And so it's a contradictory in the fact that why we do what it is that we do, and it doesn't work out according to a national-wide assessment tool. We come back and say, it's whose fault is it? It's the teacher's fault. And then we wonder why there's teacher burnout, why there's teachers that leave the profession when we think about the fact of pressure that comes. It goes against why they're becoming a teacher. And secondly, then it says, okay, maybe it is your fault that we have got this low test score milieu out there right now for students.
Yeah, Carlos, and how do you see it from your lens, Carlos?
Yeah. I think just explaining the situation, there's always antecedents that are gonna give us preludes to what's coming. And I think that this is the sequela of quarantine. When you think about specifically the data point that was used in this study, which referenced 12th graders, you think about 7th grade, there were like 7th graders when quarantine hit. And now you start going into 8th grade, 9th grade, like even coming back, you talk to a lot of educators. I know when I was an administrator, I was in the like peak of COVID, and just reintegrate them into schools. It took us like at least a year and a half, 2 years to fully adapt and have kids come back to normal or some sort of semblance. So we're seeing a significant gap of skill sets that's missing. When you think about like reading, and you think about like math, that's where you're learning like your pre-algebra, and you're structuring up, and you're like decimals, and a lot of these things that require not sometimes, I want to say most of the time, scaffolding for each student based on their academic capacity. We were really missing that. So that's what we're starting to see. I feel the sequela of and the ramifications of quarantine.
Right. And I think what happened after that too is that I think good teachers have had to change what it is that they do. I think after a time of going through remote learning and what has happened in terms of AI since then, I think good teachers have had to change their style of teaching. And I think we're seeing right now often a return in the minds of researchers that say that direct instruction should be restored back to rather than discovery learning, for example. And I don't know where that's going to go and what that really means. If I was a school administrator right now, I would be looking at this data and saying, what is it how does it reflect us? And often, as I said, it really is it indicative of our school as well. I know when I was a superintendent and we had state assessment tests and they would publish the scores of our students obviously in the daily newspaper, in the main Chicago newspapers. And if I had 9 schools, for example, elementary schools, one had to be at the bottom. Even though all 9 might have been far above state averages per se, but my 9th school had to be at the bottom. And parents of that school would always wonder why we got the lowest performing school.
Yeah.
I would respond by saying, let's look at a snapshot of this, what it looks like. There's far more indicators, I think better indicators than a national assessment test about success of our students as well as our programs.
And I want to return to this idea, though, that this perception that education is in decline. I mean, I'm looking here in 1983, the National Commission on Excellence in Education published the Nation at Risk report that criticized the state of American education. So that was 40 years ago. And they highlighted that declining in student achievement is leading to a tide of mediocrity. And so this is not new stuff. I return to it. It's not. I can't remember a time when education was like, whoa, perfect. It's good. We're in a good state. Everybody's happy. It's always in decline. There's always something wrong. There's always something to tinker towards. And that's kind of education in a nutshell. Like, what is the achievement? Should we be happy if we get 50% of the kids reading and at math and English? Is that the goal, or is that still not the goal?
What I think a lot now that we're starting to hear this a lot more, it's the behaviors are becoming a lot more intrusive. And when you think about what are teachers dealing with the most, are behavior issues and the lack of learning and the motivation. So coupled with teachers that are burnt out. Like when you think about even coming back from quarantine, I always come back to that because we're seeing the ramifications of exactly what's happening. You know, systems stayed the same, students did not come the same. So we have to know that, you know?
Yeah.
Right on target, Carlos. I don't think I do a workshop today where the number one issue doesn't come up about class management behavior. And it's so simple to talk about, well, just have relationships with kids. You know, relationships really are two-part. One, it's based upon behavior. You know, I first of all have to have a system whereby there's a certain code of conduct or behavior between the two parties who have a relationship. And then I got to make sure that I value you in some ways and that you in turn around value my input. That's what a relationship is about. And I think teachers are really struggling with that idea, saying, okay, yeah, I know I got to have relationships with my kids because that's what brings about learning, because no meaningful learning occurs without relationships that are meaningful. How do I do it? And this age has said that's so different than what they've experienced before. You know, and I think that becomes that real challenge for teachers today. Not making excuses, but I look at a whole big picture rather than that snapshot.
Yeah, and Carlos and I, you know, we met with the school recently, and they won a grant, and the school is applying the grant to reducing absenteeism. Like that's the whole focus of their grant. And they have various schools, and one of the questions I asked them was, you know, is absenteeism worse in one school than it is in another? You know, I mean, the schools are far apart. I mean, it's 50 miles apart. And they said, no, it's actually pretty equal across schools. And so, Carlos, you know, what role is absenteeism and play in declining achievement?
You know, for students, for when I was at my school, I was working. We developed an attendance task force right before COVID quarantine, because the biggest fear was, okay, we can't, you know, our attendance is growing. We you know, it's kind of weak, but it's not strong. Like, okay, where are we at? Quarantine came up, and we're like, the biggest fear is students are going to lose motivation, right? The stamina, the emotional, like, understanding of I need to get up every morning. So losing the routine. So what we started seeing is students understanding this. And, you know, when we start introducing this, then we started seeing a lot more, it exacerbated more anxiety behaviors. Working within the attendance teams, we saw like about a short percentage is students that are just engaging in defiance. Like, I don't want to go to school, right? Like it's not a large number. The biggest number that we would have and we would focus on are students with social emotional concerns. And these were like anxiety situations. Now you've been in a room, you've been in your room all day, you're in your house all day, and you're not coming out. Now you're just engaging in front of a screen. And these situations start becoming very problematic. So we're starting to see a lot more mental health situations associated with attendance. And we're also starting to see a lot more, even thinking about now, like with, you know, at least here in Los Angeles, we see more ICE raids. And working with a lot of schools, parents are scared, students are scared, so they're staying home. And that exacerbates the situation also. So it's like what we're saying, it's a total, there's so many contributing factors when it comes to attendance. So really building an understanding and find points of data on how to move it is crucial.
Yeah.
Good observation. I like that, Carlos. When you think about, I think things have also changed. You know, I've been in education a long time, and education was, I'll say, was a priority. You know, kids went to school because that was a choice. They had no other option per se. You know, you sat home, you watched, you know, for us, CBS, NBC, PBS, that was, nobody watched that. That was all you had a chance to see. Now we deliver education in a variety of different means. So it's not just sitting, occupying a button seat at school. I think the second thing is you know, I even see it in my own, you know, around me. You know, it used to be where you wouldn't take a vacation during the school year by any means, right? I mean, you had to be in school. Now, at a drop of the hat, a family would say, well, I'm going to wait for vacation for 2 weeks. Dad's got time. He's working from home or whatever it might be. We're going to leave school and just send some work along with it. And here in our cold state like Illinois, we have what's called either snow or inclement weather days, for example. So now if there's any kind of a snow, people say, I tell you what, let's do a remote learning day today. And I think all of that sends that impression is that school isn't the only place we're going to get learning.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to, so I think the issues, when they talk about the numbers, 31% of 12th graders reported missing at least 3 or more days of school in the previous month out of 20. I mean, it blows me away. And it's not just, I don't think low income areas at all. I think it's across the board.
Well, before we move on to the second story, when I stayed home, I used to watch Wheel of Fortune. So that, or not Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right, or
The Price is Right, did you?
The Price is Right. Yeah.
I love the drama, man. Got me into restorative practices. Maury or Sally Raphael, all the
Jerry Springer.
Can't believe stuff like that would air, and
that's what I was missing when I was at school. So, all right, so let's look at our second story. Our second story comes from K through 12 Dive, and the article highlights the fact that nearly a quarter of the 500 largest school districts got a new superintendent in the past academic year. This turnover is up from last year's surveys, which showed 20% rate, and a notable uptick from the pre-pandemic averages ranging from 14 to 16%. Superintendent turnover is concerning because that means district leaders are likely not staying long enough to execute the 5-year plans or blueprints that are set to address the district's needs. Additionally, women, who make up approximately 60% of the workforce in education, make up only 33% of all superintendents in the nation. So, there has been a lot of talk about teacher attrition, teacher turnover, administrator burnout, and less attention to superintendent burnout or turnover. Why do you think that is, Gary?
Well, I think amongst us as administrators, and having been a former administrator as long as I have been, and working with superintendents and principals around the world, basically, as you know, Will, it is a concern. I listen to administrators at times about their issues, and it really comes down to the point where they wear so many different hats and try to please, in some ways, so many different people. And I don't know what the secret of success is, but I know trying to please everybody is a sure sign of failure. I think the other part is that so much pressure is put on that superintendent related to culture today. It is so identifiable, I believe, about the culture of a school or the culture of a district. And we know that there's no successful learning that's going to be happening if kids don't want to be there and teachers don't want to work there. And that pressure, I think, comes from outside as the community. So many different demands today, far more than when I was a superintendent. And also from the boards of education that they employ. And it really comes to the point where even boards are offering, instead of a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, which I often would get myself, some are saying right now, we're going to give you 2 years.
Yeah.
That's an impression to say, you got 2 years to try out and see if things work. If not, we'll find somebody else. And so that's constant pressure. And I think that's what's really I see about that. The turnover rate is significant. A lot of the major projects that I have, the turnover is unbelievable. I work a lot in Buffalo, New York, as you know, since 2018. They're under the 4th superintendent since I started the project there. What is that, 8 years ago?
And Gary, one of the things that you just hit on the nail on the head was the dynamic between the board and the superintendent. And that when a board clashes with the superintendent, the superintendent most likely just leaves, or there's a lot of turnover. Can you talk a little bit? I know you were a superintendent in Illinois and Wisconsin. What was that relationship with the board? Did you have any say? I mean, what was that like as a superintendent? Because I've never had to deal. Carlos and I, we've been administrators, but we never had to go and deal with that aspect of the board.
I always could make sure in Wisconsin, I had 5 board members. In Illinois, where I spent 21 of my years, I had 7 board members. I always made sure I could count to 4. And I say that not in jest by any means, but I realize is that my entire career would be resting with the votes of 4 people. And so it was always a challenge to be able to make sure who was going to be on my board and how I was going to build relationships with them. And I think that's also, it exasperates now with the climate that we're living in, I suppose. We think about people that, are there to be able to, with an axe to grind, and someone that's there to try to push a certain issue, or when the superintendent has to make a tough decision, close a school, for example, or change boundaries of school, right? Or the idea of saying, we have a budget crisis here and we're going to have to lay off 20% of our staff. Those kinds of issues are what leads to that. And have I faced those all the time? Definitely. Often when I would have to either close a school, move a popular principal from one school to another, dismiss an administrator, or have an issue that came up within the community, within one of the schools that maybe was the result of unethical behavior part of somebody, or deciding whether my board clearly understand what my role was. They never micromanaged. One of my boards did. The struggle that I would often have is that they'd go off to conferences like you guys maybe sponsor or others, and they'd come back with ideas and want me to find problems that they had to be fixed with those ideas. And that was, how do you decide which is the direction you're going to move that school district on in?
Yeah, that's it's that aspect of politics that I hear you describing, that, thankfully as a teacher and just a principal, I never really had to play. Carlos, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you have to wear so many hats, and it's very political at the end of the day. Getting pulled so many ways, and the wear and tear. When you think about the stamina of a human being, or just you dealing with so much stress, it's taxing to the body, to the mind, to the psyche, and when that starts overwhelming the person, the motivation for the employment goes away. And everything else seems way better than my current situation. So, and also thinking about the skill set of a superintendent, they could immediately find employment in different structures, maybe not the same pay rates, but, it's not something where I feel that superintendents build a skill set that's very refined, that, is very unique to that group. So, within that, there's also added confidence. But I think the biggest thing is the wear and tear at the end of the day, because that job is very political. That job, you deal with a lot of scrutiny. You are the superintendent of the school district, so you're going to deal with a lot of that. You think about like a principal, but with bigger situations, bigger school, and bigger circumstance. So that's what I really find where we start seeing a lot of the gaps.
And Carlos, a lot of the schools that we work with, as Gary described, are going through changes at the top,
Yep.
And every time we get it, we're working with a school and one superintendent says, oh, we want to move towards restorative practices. It takes years to do that work. And a lot of times if there's a turnover at the top, that initiative could be lost.
Will, you know what? Through LARP, I meet with a lot of superintendents, and one of the biggest issues, we're not discussing, academics. We're discussing at the end of the day, how am I going to navigate the political realm here? I have a principal that doesn't want to implement this, and I know they need it. I know I have this other school budgeting, and you start troubleshooting. It's more around that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've told you, Will, but Carlos. I have a son who is kind of gone up the ranks. He's in his mid 40s. He has been everything from obviously a teacher, an assistant principal in a middle school, to a tech director, to curriculum person, assistant superintendent, has just been named superintendent of a Chicago suburban school district for next year. And it is a challenge in many ways, because I think he looks to me for some guidance and direction. Obviously, it's not that far from me here, but at the same time, I look back on my own career, and you just said there are so many things that I dealt with that nobody else really knew, even my wife. In other words, I was the kind of person that didn't come on home and simply say, "You can't believe the crap I'm dealing with right now," or the fact that my school district, and I know you guys don't even know what palm cards are at election time. It's where the political party decides which school board members should be on and issue all the senior citizens, everybody else, little tiny 2x3 cards so they can walk in the polling booth with the names of the person they vote for. Or, when you have to make a really tough decision and something goes around, or you walk out of your office at night and you got an NBC News camera looking at you in the face because of something that just came on up. So those kinds of things often was really dealt by the person has to decide, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And what has got to give up? Often it's family. It's often that balance that comes in life. And there's a lot of people that walk away from that turnover and say, hey, I'm not going to go this route anymore, and it's that challenge. The other side is that there's fewer superintendent applicants for jobs. I've been on search committees that have gone out and tried to hire individuals. And what used to be when I was applying for like 150 people applying for a superintendency at a good school district, they probably wouldn't generate 25 qualified applicants today.
So what you're saying is I have better chance now.
Hey, if my son could get the job, I think.
No, that is. I think that's true. I mean, I think it's a difficult job, and and look, I've been a principal, and as a principal, people were like, "Well, what's next?" And I saw just above me the superintendency was what the next logical move or some district position, and I have to tell you, it didn't appeal to me. It appealed to what I wanted to do. And I didn't know that about myself until I started to kind of see it at this near site and started to see the challenges that they deal with, the issues that they deal with, the politics that they deal with, and just knew for myself that, I don't think that's the aspect of education that I like.
I'd go tomorrow to the superintendency.
Yeah.
I had real regrets after Michael asked me to join him at the Institute in LA, the Josephson Institute, for 5 years. And I dabbled. I would seriously consider interim superintendencies. When my former district fired the successor, they asked if I would come back on an interim basis while they waited. And I did everything to try to say, I don't want to go that route because I just didn't think if I got back into it, I might not get out of it again. And that's how much I love that superintendency. So when I see these kinds of things, I know the challenges. And when I meet with superintendents, like you guys say, boy, it is tough today. But I think that the culture and the values of a particular school district are dependent significantly upon the person at the top. And they will, and so a district can move in a positive direction based upon the values of the school leader.
I agree. And before we jump into the third story, I mean, when we're talking about 25% of the superintendents in the largest school districts, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of students that are impacted by these turnovers. So one of the challenges, according to this article, is the underrepresentation of women in the superintendency. Carlos, what do you think will accelerate more diverse leadership at the top of these school districts?
Well, one thing that I do know is that women face fewer mentorship and sponsorship pathways, so into district level roles. So we need to start with building awareness around that, building an understanding of how we could support more women into leadership or higher leadership, district leadership positions. Hiring committees and boards still operate within male-dominated professional networks. So it's when you think about that, we need to start diversifying. We still need to build more pathways and openings for women to push up to that level.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Definitely the mentorship, I think, is the key there. So our final story comes from the New York Times and addresses Wake Forest University's Character Education Initiative. With a significant new investment, the university is expanding a network that helps colleges strengthen programs focused on integrity, compassion, leadership, and moral purpose. The initiative offers training, grants, and resources to help campuses intentionally teach and model strong character, going beyond academics to develop students who are prepared to lead, serve, and make ethical decisions. Overall, the story highlights a growing movement to ensure that college isn't just about earning a degree, but about shaping who the student becomes. And I'll go to Gary here. Why do you think character education is becoming an issue now in higher education? What gap is it trying to fill?
Well, that's a great question. Based upon an outstanding article, I was deeply touched and moved by this article because there's many times that in the field that I work within where I get the response often as well. It's too late to talk about kids' values and the kinds of things you talk about when they get to high school, or how do we find time to fit, quote, the kinds of things you talked about into a high school curricula, or kids aren't interested in those because it's all about academics. And then you hear the university coming out and simply say, Wake Forest, and the work that they're doing not only with that university, with others, to say, these are important skills that we think are necessary, and we're going to work hard to make sure it's a part of what it is that we do. And not only in terms of its methodology for determining those the best practices to be able to teach it, but how they can provide support ongoing to students to develop those necessary, what we often would call soft skills, right?
Yeah.
And I found that to be, I think, very intriguing. We struggle at the high school level, at least what I see it often, about these characters, social emotional growth. And here at the college level, saying, hey, this is important. We're going to not only invest in it, not only they are going to invest in it, but actually foundations that are a part of this, that large amounts of money. And I really was really interested in how they are targeting, as I said, colleges and universities, institutes of higher ed, to make a significant difference in what we think are so important, those character and values and social and emotional skills.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how these programs are organized, what kind of curriculum they use, what kind of how are they teaching these resources at the higher ed level. And Carlos, one of the things we talk about with a lot of schools that we work with is, for restorative practices, you always say, well, what are you restoring to? And you always want to restore to the core values of the school. But oftentimes when we talk to schools about what are their core values, they often don't know. They have them on a website or on a poster somewhere, but they're not operationalized. And so can you talk a little bit about, Carlos, the role that values play in the restorative practice movement?
It's super important. We start building continuity of language, continuity of expectations, right? And we start allowing a process where teachers now and administrators, disciplinarians are able to start having conversations around expectations and violation of expectations and opposing behaviors. Once we don't establish those factors, then we start seeing just behavior all over the place. No continuity of expectations, of systems. So, and we start building also when we have clear defined expectations or values that, or, positive behaviors that we want to see, then we're able to grow from it. We're able to build training, awareness, and learning. And now our focus becomes a little more narrow versus, hey, we're going to think about just throwing these values together. And now you have like this combination all over every, class, and every class is doing something different. So key focus here is continuity. And so it's super important, especially when you're thinking about a student. Like, I know when I was a dean, when I would have a student get sent to us or get sent to me because, engaged in opposing behaviors. And we built our school discipline system. We had our core values, and our core values had sub behaviors, which were opposing behaviors and positive behaviors. And that really dictated and allowed the ambience of the school and built the culture. And when they would come to get sent to our school, to my office, I would immediately have that reflection conversation with the student, because we had done the work. We did the advisory lessons. We were doing circles. We were doing a lot of the work around what are these values look like on an everyday. So I would ask the students, hey, what value you think you went against? Mm-hmm. Oh, mister, I think I went professionalism and empathic, empathy, because, the teacher, plans and develops her lesson. And I just violated that process. I interrupted and I didn't help that whole process to happen. And I wasn't professional because that was our expectation. So it's super important for us to have that, because now we start building this standardized, language and conversation.
Yeah, and it's like the speed sign. I mean, you have to have it posted so
Sure.
who's going too fast and who's going too slow. And like, those are our values in a community there. And Gary, I mean, one of the things that I kind of walk away from here is a worry of what, how do you organize? Like, there's going to be a lot of money thrown at these programs, but like, what are they going to be shaped like so they endure. My worry is that there's a lot of money, something gets done, and a book gets written somewhere, and it just lives on a shelf.
The thing that I found interesting, it goes back to what you say, how or what's the method they're going to use. One of the things that came in the article is that one size really does not fit all. In other words, I think the character formation must be tailored to each institution's unique mission and student population. It almost sounds like something that we would say at Character Counts, right? We're not an off-the-shelf program. We customize what is it, we're to fit your needs. We listen to what your needs are going to be. We're going to provide ongoing support over a period of time. And I also like the fact that they looked upon what best instructional practices. They listed things like reflection, dialogue, habituation through practice, engagement with examples. And I think about, man, that really matches what we know what research says. So I find that it's hopefully it's going to be instilled. The other thing is I read their website of Wake Forest. It's ongoing. They have seminars. They have some where they bring people together, where they can get ongoing training to key leaders. And I'm convinced that is the best practice that we can do today. It's not just putting a program into practice and leaving it alone. And you know what I feel about that, Will, with all the work that I do. That's the hardest part. So it's got some sustainability. And I think that's what really interesting. And I'd like to follow this and see how many of these schools put it to practice, what it is that they intended to do. Are they operationalizing what it is that they value?
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting initiative for sure. It is encouraging. It's encouraging because a lot of times by the time people say, well, you're in college, like you're beyond this character education stuff, but to see a university investing in it is encouraging. And so Gary and Carlos, that actually brings us to the end of the podcast. We try to keep it under 30 minutes, but you always go over 4 or 5 minutes, depending on the day. I have to be kind of like the police officer of the time. But, Gary, I just want to thank you so much for being here. I'm super grateful for your mentorship, your friendship, and just learning from you. I've sat in, you don't know this part, but Carlos and I, we worked together at a high school in inner city LA, and we developed like a homegrown character education program called PCAP. And Carlos created the values, he embedded it into the discipline. I was trying to write the curriculum, and during that time was when I got hired by the school that I went to internationally, and they had the Character Counts program. And when I went to that training, which you organized, Gary, I mean, I now know that 3-day training that I sat through, everything was you.
It was me.
I realized, like, I wish we would have had, this program already, because there's so many resources. We were starting from scratch, trying to do the same work that you had already done at Character Counts. And, I learned a lot with Carlos because, we were in it. We were about making sure that everybody on our staff adhered to the values, was promoting the values. But to see it at that scale of Character Counts, I really was inspired, and I'm still inspired. And so I'm super grateful, Gary, for everything. And I just want to thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you. Nice to meet with you, Carlos, as well. I really give you guys credit for the work that you do on a daily basis of trying to change kids' lives. And that's such a critical part of why we do it is what we do, where we're in the change business. And all that we can do is get kids to be able to believe it's worth it to change, because they're going to gain more than they're going to give up. And I get the same thing of teachers about putting any kind of thing into practice. They're going to gain more as a teacher, have more instructional time than what they got to give up in terms of working harder or what it may be. And so I looked at all of these stories today as saying that there's really it's all about change. And what we can do as change leaders, I commend you for your work as well.
Thank you so much, Gary. And Carlos, I want to leave you with the positive thought of the week. I know I always put you on the spot, but share that thought as we close the podcast today.
Well, I'm going to give you more than a thought. Will, we're going into Thanksgiving break, and I want us, the administrators, teachers, educators, change makers, motivators, to take this break and, yes, spend time with family, enjoy every moment of it, enjoy moments celebrating, but also take the time to build a self-inventory of what helped you get through these couple of months. and allow yourself to dive back in, honor yourself. Congratulations, you have gotten here. And make sure that you're in the moment. Do some loving on yourself. Have a beautiful, beautiful Thanksgiving, everyone.
Absolutely. And so thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Dr. Gary Smit, for being on today's podcast. You can listen to 3 in the News on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and Amazon. Be sure to follow us to get notifications on new episodes. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good night. Bye, everybody.
Good night.